Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to be a continuation of a previous lesson from Job's 21st chapter. We took it all the way up till the 16th verse. We're going to take this one from 17 all the way home through 34, and this is in response to Zophar the Naamanite's second speech. This is Job's seventh speech, and this is the second and final time we hear from Zophar the Naamanite. He is the junior most member of the trio of comforters who are introduced, and they present in the order in which they themselves are presented. In chapter 2, verse 11, we hear from Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuahite in round 3, that we don't hear from him. So this is his final words, and he gives a ballad of the wicked. He and his two other companions, we haven't met Elihu yet, he emerges in the 32nd chapter. They defend the same orthodoxy that the wicked receive their just deserts and they are deserved. They cannot escape calamity in this lifetime. Ergo, Job suffered because he had sinned in secret, something terrible, and they defended this. So what we have between Job and his three antagonist comforters, misleadingly named, is an irresistible force meeting an immovable object. Job stubbornly maintains his insistence of his own innocence. These three friends get a lot more personal in their and vindictive in their language, because if it could happen to Job out of the blue, that means it could happen to them. And the 20th chapter, Zophar's second speech, consists of three main arguments. He argues that the life of the wicked is brief in verses 4 through 11. He also argues that their pleasure is temporary in verses 12 through 19, and that their death is painful and deservedly so in verses 20 through 29. Job's 21st chapter meets along the similar structure. He dismantles these three arguments, or at least tries to. He gives his observation from a different lens. He argues that the wicked often live long lives. They are prospering in verses 7 through 16. They are not necessarily always sent calamity in verses 17 through 21, and their death is no different from that of the righteous. Rich or poor, believer or unbeliever, we all die the same. And so what we're going to do is review what Zophar said in the final two of his arguments. Job addresses the lives one in the first 16 verses. We're going to read what he has to say about the fleeting and ephemeral nature of the pleasure of wickedness. Verse 12. Though evil is sweet in his mouth, he hides it under his tongue. He fondles it and does not forsake it, but keeps it in his mouth. So evil people have an appetite for evil things. They consume it, they indulge in it, they pursue it, and they masticate it all throughout their mouth, and they chew on it. They do not, but eventually they vomit it up, as we read in verse 15. He has swallowed down riches, then vomits them up. El drives it out of his stomach. So even though he fills his own stomach seemingly at the abuse and exploitation of other men, the perfect judge in the sky is going to see his wrathful retribution visited upon those who got their riches and their gains by ill-gotten means, ill-gotten wealth. He has given back what he labored for, verse 18. He does not eat it, like wealth from his trade, but he does not enjoy. For he has oppressed, he has forsaken the poor, he has seized a house which he did not build. So the wicked who prosper in this way do not deserve to prosper for long, and if there is any justice in the universe, then they would not get away with it. Unfortunately, justice is often eluded. It's elusive and not always attainable on this earth. There is justice in the universe. The wicked and the righteous alike, have to answer to the omnipotent judge, the omniscient one, the all-seeing, all-knowing eye in the sky, give an account for how they have lived when they meet him at their end. But the fact is that it's an oversimplification to suggest that those who sow where they do not reap, or will not have wealth that lasts. This is clearly invalidated by the socioeconomic realities. There is no leftover after he has eaten, therefore his good does not last. With all his plenty he is in distress. The hand of every laborer comes against him. So even though they overindulge and they pack, they feast and buffet, nothing is going to outlive them. Their pleasure, they pursue their immediate gratification, and they are implicitly lost in the process. And even when they have all this abundance and this temporal and material abundance, they are in distress, and every laborer comes against him. Job earlier laments that his servants did not, he had to beg his servants from his own mouth in a role of reversal. So his employees did not respect him as they once did. Verse 26, all darkness waits for his treasure. A fire not blown consumes him. It destroys what remains in his tent. The heavens reveal his wicked, and the earth rises up against him. So darkness is analogous to hell. It is the netherworld. It is Sheol, the place of permanent death. And that's, you can't take anything with you when you die. Naked I came into the earth, naked I shall return. Job says as much as in 121. And the fire is, that can mean one of two things: an earthly fire, which is often a form of divine judgment, or hellfire, which is most emphatically a form of divine judgment, and it will destroy whatever remains. And the heavens will pronounce their judgment, and the earth will act accordingly. Now, these three comforters, these three friends, they stubbornly insist that the earthly justice is reflective. It's a perfectly reflective microcosm of the heavenly justice. Human imperfections and the overlap and interchange of free will prevent and pervert the execution and implementation of perfect justice. The increase of his house departs, flowing away in the day of his wrath. This is the portion from Elohim for a wicked man, and the heritage El has decreed for him. So this is all completely just. Of course, people who gain who prosper at the expense and the backs and the exploitation and the abuse and the oppression of others do not deserve to have lasting treasures, but the unfortunate reality is that they often do. But the heritage that El has decreed for them may not visit them on this life. Certainly there is a karmic boomerang, a cause and effect. If you exploit, misuse, and abuse other people, eventually and inevitably you will reap what you sow. Some people make it through an entire lifetime without suffering any real deserved consequences for their wickedness, but all rights will be wronged in the end. And Job is patiently pleading for his day in court. He wants to be vindicated. He's ready to present his case to El Shaddai himself to prove that he is sinless. And so in the 17th verse, remember verses 17 through 21, he dismantles, or at least attempts to. He offers his observation from a different vantage point, different perspective of Zophar's second argument. He says that the wicked are not always necessarily sent calamity, whereas Zophar argues insistently that they do, and deservedly so. How often, verse 17, how often is the lamp of the wicked put out, and calamity comes upon them? Sorrow he allots in his displeasure. The lamp of the wicked is the lamp of light, so when they are snuffed out, that means their life has ended. They have no more light, they have no more life. And calamity is not necessarily fatal. It can also be injurious or devastating and detrimental, and sorrow is the consequence. Now, without sin, there would be no sorrow. So the cause and effect, if you get rid of the sin, there will be no sorrow. And the genre into which Job it can be categorized as that of a theodicy. It explores and explains the relationship of suffering to the righteous. Why do righteous people who do not deserve to suffer nevertheless? And by the opposite end of the same coin, why do wicked people prosper who do not deserve to be to do so? And Job presents it in the question. He's not saying it as he's saying, how often. He's casting doubt and aspersions on an absolute statement. So he's presenting it in the form of a question to suggest that this is not, the calamity does not always visit them, and they're not always visited with sorrow, and their life does not always expire prematurely. Not always. They are like straw before the wind, and like chaff that a storm steals away. So straw and chaff have no moors, no foundation, no anchor. They are blown in the wind as easily to and fro. This is analogous to, we speak of the wheat and the chaff, and read Psalms 1:4, for the life of the wicked, they are blown to and fro, they have itching ears, which go from one heresy which tickles their ears to the other. And so this is an apt description of the wicked, which is very much in agreement with much of his comforters. Job does in some sense ascribe to the same orthodoxy. He insists that all punishment and plague is visited by the hand of a supernatural force. So he has the feeling that there's something supernatural at work in his life, but what he doesn't consider is that it is Satan at the sovereign permission of Elohim who is permitted to tempt him. Eloah stores up one's wickedness for his children. Let him repay him so that he knows him. Eloah is the singular version of Elohim, which is plural. Elohim is a team, Father, Son, and Spirit. He's referred often in the singular tense throughout the book of Job. And the Bible teaches that sometimes children can, will, and sometimes must suffer for the sins of their parents. The Decalogue says, I visit the punishments and the plagues of them who hate me unto the third and fourth generation. Read the book of Lamentations. The mothers were boiling their own children, resorting to cannibalism to feed themselves. And why? Because they had sinned, their parents had sinned, their parents had sinned, and their parents had sinned. But Ezekiel 18 argues that, children cannot be punished. They may suffer the consequences, but they cannot bear the eternal consequences of living in the degraded conditions that their ancestors' sins did. So the Bible is all about individual accountability, and if we are visited by poverty because of the covenant nation's ancestors' waywardness, that would certainly invite challenges and temptations that might not otherwise be there, but they are still individually accountable, and there is we are saved or damned by our own decisions. There is no salvation or damnation by proxy. Let his eyes see his destruction, and let him drink of the wrath of El Shaddai. The wrath of El Shaddai is often compared, first off, El Shaddai translates as God Almighty, so he is a God of wrath. That is his judgment, and it's often compared to a cup of wine, and that it stings initially, but it ultimately heals. So he's praying that, he's acknowledging that, the wicked don't always see the destruction, but Job's praying to let it be visited upon them. If I am righteous and I am suffering, and the wicked are flourishing and they are not suffering, let some of the bitter taste of my own medicine, which I do not deserve, be passed on to them. This is not an unrighteous prayer. Vengeance is Yahweh's, so that's often the patient and the faithful. The most faithful thing we can do is to not take vengeance into our own hands, but to cede the prerogative and the privilege and the right and the responsibility to El Shaddai. For what is his delight in the house after him, when the number of his months is cut off? So he doesn't have a whole lot to look forward, and that he doesn't have a progeny or a future. The ancients put a lot of stock and premium on progeny. This was considered a sign of divine blessing. But Job is just saying, nothing's going to await the wicked. But it's also in the form of a question, so this should not be read as an absolute statement. He's putting it in the form of the question, so he is not. Now, when we read these monotonally and out loud, it may appear that Job is stating these as absolute statements, but the text indicates that he is asking questions, so there is doubts in his mind. He does not believe every word that he just said. We just want to clarify that, although we did make it seem that his argument was consistent with much of what we read of in his three comforters. Now, this is the third part of the Job's third chapter, 21st chapter, the seventh speech, and this is in response to Zophar's third argument that the death is painful. Job argues that death is no different for the wicked in verses 22 through 34, but not quite yet. Does anyone teach El knowledge, since he judges those that are exalted? Elohim is an omniscient being that is the attribute of infinite or unlimited intelligence. There is nothing we can teach him. He is literally incapable of learning because he already knows everything that is, everything that was, and everything that is to be. He combines knowledge in one big, broad, panoramic view. He has instant access to total and thorough and consistent information. We are not his counselor. Paul argues much the same thing in the 11th chapter of Romans. Read verses 33 through 36. It is an act of borderline blasphemous presumption to even claim to be able to counsel the omniscient one. And what right have any of us to judge those to judge the motives or the morality or the moral order or the execution or the providential working over him who judges those who are exalted? Those who are exalted can mean either the angels or the prosperous in the world. The unrighteous rich will have to answer for the life they live. But, this combines two things, his attribute of omniscience, which is intelligence and wisdom, and his attribute of omnipotence, that is the all-powerful. So he is the judge. We do not judge him. We cannot teach him. We cannot dare presume to teach him or judge him. One dies in his perfect strength, completely at ease and satisfied. This is in reference to the wicked. They do not die weak or diminished. They die in health, and they die in comfort and surrounded by those they love. They die in abundance, and they live with the satisfaction that they have provided something for their progeny. And then procreative proclivity was considered a sign by the ancients of divine blessing, but Job argues that not only do the children of the wicked outproduce sometimes the righteous, but also their farm animals and livestock. So the death, the wicked they have no less to look forward to in the day of death than do the righteous. And in fact, from this vantage point, they have more to look forward to. His pails are filled with milk, and his bones are juicy with marrow. So he has food to eat, and he has health within him. His bones are juicy with marrow. Job was emaciated. He was borderline anorexic. He was skin and bones. We read of his physical decrepitude. He is covered head to toe in skin boils, and he's emaciated. His breath stinks. His wife can't stand the smell of his breath, so he is not in a physically pristine state, and he is envying the fate of the wicked who die with marrow in their bones, and well fed and well satisfied, and having their temporal provisions satisfied. Another one dies in the bitterness of his soul, and he never eats with pleasure. So death is not a uniform pattern. There is no equal opportunity. Death is a democracy. It comes to us all equal, and it makes us all equal when it comes. That's the quote of the English philosopher John Donne. But, death, it doesn't all come to us the same way. And, there is, how you want, everyone has their version and their picture and their vision of their perfect death. Most of us prefer to die peacefully in our sleep. No one wants to die in a concentration camp, to give the most extreme, worst possible case scenario. So this is the fate of one. Now, death comes to us all the same, but it does not come to us all the same way. So there are other people, not necessarily wicked or not necessarily righteous, who die bitter, and they do not die with satisfaction or pleasure or delight. They are not happy. They do not die a happy death because they do not live a happy life. Together they lie down in the dust, and worms cover them. From dust we came, Genesis 2:7. Yahweh formed Adam from the dust, and to dust we shall return. Ecclesiastes 3:21, I believe. Our bodies do become worm food. Our physical bodies, our mortal frames of flesh are designed to decay and perish in accordance with the laws of nature and physics, and we will be consumed by worm food when we rise in the ground, but the resurrected will have a perfected body which is designed to withstand an eternity. But what he's saying, to tie it into the 23rd verse all the way there, this is the 26th, is that no matter how you die, you eventually become worm food and fertilizer. And that's just the way it is, whether you live or die happily or in pain or in pleasure or anything else, you're going to become eaten by worm food. That's the law. That's the cycle of nature. That's the cycle of life. And it's the law of life as well. Look, I know your thoughts and the plots with which you wronged me. Job wants them to know he knows what they're all about. He complains and laments in other passages that I've heard everything you said. You're not teaching me anything new. Do any of you have an original idea or thought to call your own? And, their plots, they're trying to trap him. They're trying to accuse him without evidence. And this they are mimicking. They are mimicking Satan in two ways. Satan is the accuser who makes groundless accusations without base or factual merit. And he also endorses the commercial conception of worship. He says, take away this hedge from Job and he will curse you to your face. So he's accusing Job of having unworthy motives and of Yahweh of being a deity unworthy of worship. You have to pay people to worship you. And Job's three friends subscribe to the philosophy that righteousness will be rewarded temporarily. But if that were the case, then religion would be reduced to a self-serving, selfish exercise and would lose all meaning. Religion is not for our benefit. It is always and only about him. For you say, where is the house of the noble one, and where is the tent of the dwelling place of the wicked? They're asking about two locations, two types of characters, noble and wicked. These are polar opposites. A noble one is not necessarily socioeconomic rank or station. It is one who is righteous and true and has integrity and is upright, has the characteristics, if not the birth or the title of nobility. And the wicked, a lot of noble people are wicked. A lot of peasants are wicked too. But the character now, the house of the noble one in the tent, house is structurally more substantive than a tent. It is but stronger and sturdier, but the tent is less impressive, so it is only right that the wicked dwell in less secure habitations than the house of the noble one. Job is effectively homeless and penniless, and childless. The physical structures which housed his children when they had their parties, good, wholesome, clean fun, but it structured. So he was, he may have not had a house to lay his head, and he certainly was penniless because all of his livestock, all of his cattle had been stolen by raiders and bandits. Have you not asked those passing by the way, and do you not know their signs? Signs, the awareness and the knowledge and the ability to interpret signs is a testament of spiritual maturity. The Savior chastises the sign seekers of his own generations for their ability to read the sky and the clouds, but not know the season of the time. And Job is saying, how can you, when you see all these people, what fairy tale world are you living in where the righteous are always rewarded materially with abundance and plenty, and the wicked go a-begging? I am righteous and I am destitute, I am begging, I did nothing to deserve it. What fairy tale world are you living in? So he accuses them of arguing from a narrow dogmatism which belittles and obscures information that could be acquired from observation. The theoretically, the wicked will get their deserved deserts, but that's not always the case. There is a difference between reality and theory. And of course, if there was justice justice is rare on the earth, but there is justice in the universe, as we already made plain. That the wicked is kept for the day of calamity. They are brought to the day of wrath. So the first one is a question. The wicked is reserved for the day of calamity. Now, remember the theme of theodicy. Why do the righteous suffer? And by the opposite end of the same coin, why do the wicked prosper? And, he's questioning, is the wicked kept for the day of calamity? Everything I see, I am being visited with calamity. I am not wicked. You say that I am, but I know that I am not. I know myself. I know I know I'm not sinless, but I did not sin to deserve this. And are they brought to the day of wrath? Not always, not necessarily in this lifetime. Job struggles and doubts and fluctuates between his concrete certainty of the resurrection and, he's prepared to go to Sheol himself, but he ultimately fluctuates into statements that are expressions of hope for a better world which awaits him beyond this cruel, painful world, which he longs for death as a sweet release from the bitter, exquisite agony of life. Who declares his way to his face, and who repays him for what he has done? So this is humans. Who declares his way to his face? Who declares the wicked? Who explains and exposes their own wickedness to them? The wicked know that they are wicked, but wickedness is, in order to flourish, it must suppress itself, so it has to be exposed, and this is where human intervention comes in. And vengeance and lex talionis. Lex talionis is the principle of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. If you stabbed your neighbor's eyes out, he had every right to take your eye out, and the principle was designed to restrict vengeance because it's human nature. If a neighbor gouges your eyes out, you want to gouge out both of them, the principle. But ultimately, vengeance is not to be encouraged, is not to be sought, certainly not in the New Testament. We are to forsake and forego judgment, and this has a precedent in the Deuteronomy, the book of where Yahweh says, vengeance is mine, and Paul quotes it in the 12th chapter of Romans. As for him, he is brought to the grave, and a watch is kept over the tomb. So eventually and inevitably, we all meet our death. We all are brought to the grave. We are dead and buried, and have our funeral proceedings and procession. And we are watched over in a tomb. Hopefully, we can afford a dignified burial place of rest, which will watch over our bones and keep our spirits intact. So the ancients did place a lot of emphasis on funerary rites, and he's just stating a pretty obvious statement, pretty self-evident. The clouds of the wadi shall be sweet to him, and all the men follow him. Innumerable are those before him. So as overpopulated as the planet Earth is at the filming of this, we are approaching 8 billion people. There are those who lived before us, all the people of all the ages, even though the proportion diminishes as our population explodes through advances in medical and agricultural technology. But it's going to be sweet when he meets the company of those who went before him. We have the cloud of witnesses, those who had only the hope, of whom we read of in Hebrews 11. The innumerable are those before him. These are the ones who have been running the race that we've been kept going for over 2,000 years. 34th and final verse. How then do you comfort me in vain, seeing that perverseness remains in your answers? So they are described somewhat misleadingly as comforters in the second chapter 11th verse. Their counsel is not very comforting. They do not approach him as a friend. They have no compassion. They have no sympathy. They have no empathy. They are determined to get him to confess. They want him to fess up. They all know that he has some secret sin, but they do not offer words of solace, healing, relief, or counsel. They don't tell him. First off, they're telling him lies and baseless innuendos and accusations. So the perversity was reflected and expressed in their answers and in their statements and in their explanations, which had no semblance or bearing on the situational realities. And the language we take is to be considered with gravity, for as we read in the New Testament, Matthew 12:26-37, by every idle word a man shall be judged. By your words you may be acquitted, and by your words you may be condemned. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.